The first thing he did was step closer to the woman who'd been stripped down to almost nothing, and for one terrible second, it looked like he was there to finish what the others had started. Even she believed it, right up until he dropped his coat at her feet. She was pressed against old stone, clutching a rotten plank to her chest. Dirt and dried blood streaked across her skin under the summer sun. Her lips were cracked, and her hands shook so hard the plank kept slipping. The windmill creaked above her, slow and tired, and the rope swayed, frayed fibers clicking softly against the beam. Like a warning, the wind kept repeating. When she saw the man's boots stop in front of her, she lifted her face and cried out, "Just kill me." Caleb looked past her first, not at her body, but at the ground. He saw the wheel ruts cut too clean for drifters, the boot prints laid down by men who worked together, and the drag marks that ended right at the well. Caleb had seen tracks like these back in 1868 when men left messages in blood rather than words. It put a tired weight in his chest, the kind a man carries for the rest of his years. This wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't lust gone wrong. It was a message left in the open range. He reached for his coat, and she flinched hard, squeezing her eyes shut, certain the worst was coming. Instead, the coat hit the dirt at her feet, followed by a canteen that rolled and stopped against the stone. "Cover yourself," he said, his voice low, worn smooth by years of wind. While she pulled the coat around her shaking body, he walked a few steps away, hands loose, head tilted, listening. That was when a shadow moved at the edge of the scrub. 2 men this time, one close, one hanging back with a rifle he didn't raise. The nearer one smiled like a job half done and asked if the rancher was lost, like a varmint pretending to be polite. Caleb answered by planting his feet, because some wrongs didn't need explaining. The nearer man lunged, and Caleb met him with bone and dirt. The fight short, ugly, and quiet, no shots fired, 'cause even bad men know gunfire carries. The second man grabbed his partner and pulled him into the brush, and both disappeared like they had never been there. Caleb caught the mark on his wrist, one of Hart's men, and the second man's eyes hardened. Like he'd just been named, Caleb went back to the well, sat down beside her without touching, and looked her in the eye. "Whatever you did," he said, steady and plain. This wasn't justice. He handed her water, not too fast, because he had buried people who drank too fast after nearly dying. She wrapped the coat tighter and finally spoke without begging. Her name was Evelyn Hart. The last name landed heavy, and Caleb didn't pretend he hadn't heard it before. They moved off the open ground, just far enough to sit in the shade of a low-cut bank where the wind did not carry voices. Evelyn talked like someone sorting broken glass. She said her husband, Silas Hart, was a respected man in Cheyenne, and he had his eye on her family parcels that brushed too close to the new rail lines. She had found out about the other woman months ago. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told her to be smart, to stay quiet, to enjoy the life his name provided. Evelyn said the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was being told her pain was an inconvenience, like a stain he expected her to scrub alone. So she did something foolish, something angry, something she knew would burn. She went to meet a man named Jasper Crow, a gambler with clean boots and no roots. She didn't go looking for pleasure. She went looking for a way out, and chose the wrong door. Jasper did not protect her. He sold the tale before the room even cooled. By the time Evelyn understood that, Silas had already decided how to handle it. Men came for her at night. Men who knew where the well stood and how far screams traveled. When she finished, the air felt thinner. Caleb finally spoke, slow and even. "You made a bad choice," he said, "but that wasn't what they punished you for. They punished her because she embarrassed a powerful man." Evelyn asked if he was taking her to the law. Caleb looked toward the distant line of the trail and said nothing, because the law was already riding toward them. Caleb had seen that kind of dust line before. Tight formation, shod hooves, no wandering. A badge like that doesn't stumble into trouble. It gets sent, and the man wearing that badge wasn't coming to help her. He was coming to make sure she stayed broken. They stayed off the main trail, cutting through scrub and low ground where dust did not rise too loud. They were almost to the outskirts of Laramie when the sound of hooves found them first. Someone had ridden ahead with the story, and Wade Klein was waiting where the trail had to pinch narrow. He wasn't alone in the idea. Someone in Laramie had been paid to watch that pinch and send word. The man who pulled up wore a badge that caught the sun. Wade Klein. Town marshal out of Cheyenne, a man who smiled like he already knew the ending. He carried court paper like a man who knew which judges owed Silas Hart favors. He did not look at Caleb much. His eyes stayed on Evelyn. Slow and measuring, he said her name like it belonged to a piece of property. He claimed there was a warrant for larceny, a neat word that could hang a woman faster than any rumor. Caleb asked to see it. Wade showed paper with a judge's name Caleb recognized, one that did favors for the right men. Then Wade reached into his saddlebag and held up a piece of jewelry that glinted clean. Too clean for a woman dragged through scrub, too polished for a night like hers. Evelyn froze. Caleb saw it in her face before she said anything. She had never owned it. Wade stepped closer, too close. He grabbed for Evelyn's arm, hard enough to hurt. That was when Caleb moved. Caleb took a hit that rang his skull. But he stayed upright. Years of breaking horses taught him balance mattered more than strength. Caleb ended up on his knees, wrists burning as iron closed around them. Evelyn was pulled away, her eyes locked on him, not screaming this time. Wade leaned close to Caleb and spoke low. She should have stayed loyal. As they dragged Caleb toward a post, he saw something Wade did not: fear. Because men who framed the innocent always left tracks behind. If this old trail story keeps you company, stay with me. Drop where you're listening from. Then watch what a bad badge does when it thinks no one's looking. The paper Wade carried was only half the story, and the other half was Evelyn hauled into a wagon on the South Road. Caleb did not stay on his knees long. 2 days later, a man named Eli Barrett got him out on bail, called in an old army favor, and laid money on the desk like it tasted bad. Caleb stepped into the sun with a bruised shoulder and a jaw that still ached, and he didn't complain once. Those 2 days sat on Caleb's shoulders like wet wool, because Evelyn was somewhere in a cell with Silas Hart's men deciding what came next. Eli stopped him halfway down the street. "That badge isn't the real trouble," he said. "The paper behind it is." That was when Caleb learned the rest of it. Silas Hart was not just cleaning up a marriage. He was cleaning up land. There were parcels tied to Evelyn's name, old family rights that brushed too close to the rail line, and a supply route the Army cared about. It was the same ground Evelyn had mentioned, the parcels Silas wanted without a fight. Those parcels weren't just dirt. They sat right where Silas needed the paper to make his deals look clean. If she signed them over quietly, everything stayed polite. If she did not, she became a problem that needed a lesson. Caleb asked where Evelyn was being held. Eli shook his head. "She won't stay put long," he said. "Men like Hart don't keep loose ends overnight. They did not go to the sheriff. They went where men hid things they did not want found. Jasper Crow took some finding. Caleb and Eli watched him for a day, in and out of a gambling room behind a dry goods store, smoke thick enough to choke truth. When Caleb finally sat across from him, Jasper laughed like a man who thought he was safe. That laugh lasted until Caleb slid one of Silas's own letters onto the table, folded just enough to show a signature. Caleb did not threaten him. He told him a simple thing: Silas Hart paid well, and Silas Hart erased witnesses better. Jasper's eyes shifted. He talked fast after that. He admitted the story had been sold. He admitted there were letters. And he admitted where Silas kept copies, in case loyalty ever needed reminding. One more door opened that night. Lydia Vale opened it on the second night, and her eyes kept flicking to the street like she expected Silas to step out of the dark. She'd seen Silas end a man's livelihood over less, and her hands shook as she handed over the little book with neat writing and ugly names. "I won't hang for him," she said. By the time the sun came up, Caleb had paper, names, and a reason someone powerful would listen. But none of it mattered if Evelyn did not live to see morning, because Silas Hart wasn't waiting for a trial. He was arranging an accident. They reached Cheyenne before the sun climbed too high, dust hanging over the streets like a held breath. Silas Hart did not expect trouble that morning. Caleb walked straight. Papers folded inside his coat, boots steady, eyes clear. Eli stayed close, quiet as a shadow that knew when to speak. They placed truth where it could no longer be ignored. The letter spoke first, then the ledger did. Names, payments, favors traded like cards across a table. The kind of things that made a badge suddenly feel heavy on a man's chest. A clerk leaned in, eyes narrowing as he followed the columns. A deputy shifted his stance, and his hand settled on Silas's shoulder like a weight. Silas's smile thinned because he could feel the room turning before a single word was spoken. When Evelyn was brought out, she stood straighter than she had at the well. Still bruised, still tired, but alive, and seen. Silas tried to talk his way free. He always had. But words lose their shine when daylight hits them hard enough, and when he finally reached for anger instead, it was too late. Silas's hand twitched toward his hip, but the room full of witnesses and the weight of those ledgers stayed his draw. No gunfight followed, no cheering crowd, just a powerful man watching the ground come up to meet him. Evelyn did not cheer either. She breathed. For the first time in days, she breathed without fear. Later, far from Cheyenne, Caleb showed her a small stretch of land near Laramie. Nothing fancy, good water, quiet mornings. He did not promise her a new life. He offered her room to build one. That was the lesson Caleb had learned long ago. People don't need saving as much as they need a fair chance to stand again. Evelyn chose to stay, not because she was rescued, but because she was respected. If someone you met at their worst asked for help, would you judge first or would you look closer? So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you were riding that trail and saw a woman at the edge of life, would you turn away because of her mistake? Or would you do what Caleb did and give her a chance to stand again? If this tale stayed with you, tap like. It helps the channel more than you might think. And if you want more stories told slow and honest, subscribe and ride along. Drop a line below with where you're listening from. I read more of them than you'd guess. She said, just kill me. And the old rancher answered the only way a decent man can, by giving her one more morning.